reaching out a face-to-face with you one more time. Looking for a heart-to-heart whenever you're ready. We want you to know, if you ever should look in the mirror and wonder who it is that you are, and wonder what it is that...
Welcome everyone to HEDNA at Home, our first ever virtual conference. The entire conference team is thrilled to be hosting HEDNA at Home. We have well over 400 registered attendees from around the world. We've developed an amazing agenda, which includes industry thought leaders whom are willing to share their views on how the industry will recover. My name is Audrey Moranti, and I work for Sabre. I will serve as your host of today's event. The keynote session and our two panels will take questions immediately following their sessions, and you can submit questions by selecting the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We will be recording the entire conference and making each session available for you on YouTube. So let's get started. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Sebastian Littner, VP of Partnerships at Cloudbeds and the President of HEDNA, to officially launch our conference with his President's welcome.
All right. Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to HEDNA at Home. Where are my notes? Where are my notes? They're here. Let's get started. My name is Sebastian Leitner, Vice President of Partnerships at Cloudbeds. I'm honored to have taken over as HEDNA President from Sarah Fools in January earlier this year. Let's begin with the Code of Conduct. You are bound by the HEDNA Code of Conduct when participating in HEDNA activities. If you're not familiar with aspects of the Code of Conduct, please visit our website. You should always visit our website anyway, but here is a hint to our website, hedna.org/code of conduct. Members and non-members participating in HEDNA activities are expected to abide by its terms. Let's get started. Last week, Facebook reminded me that it has been exactly 3 years that we all met in Dublin at the HEDNA conference in 2017. Besides being cold and rainy and having a few Guinness, we talked about Brexit, GDPR, data as the new currency, the electronic passport, and how historical data is no longer a reliable predictor of future purchasing patterns. All right. 2 years ago, we met in Lisbon. The theme was a conversation with tomorrow's guest, discussing engagement, social marketing, or marketing in social media, new lodging concepts, catering to a new generation of travelers where experiences drive choices. Unfortunately, I had to leave early. I left the conference as my wife was expecting our second boy. Last year, we met in Madrid in May. We discussed in detail the impact of strong customer authentication, artificial intelligence, attribute-based offers, distribution and pricing, and reviewed the impact of vacation rentals on European hospitality, amongst other things. Now, if all goes well, we will be in Vienna, in Austria, in 2021 for our HEDNA Global Conference in June. I can't wait to see you there in person and look back at what we have hopefully by then fully overcome. The single most impactful event in recent history, affecting everyone globally. Now looking further back, my first ever HEDNA conference was in May of 2006. It was in Germany, in Frankfurt, at the Frankfurter Hof. Completely new to the industry, I was in awe listening to thought leaders, innovators, as they shared their wealth of knowledge and expertise on stage and during the numerous social activities. The most memorable event for me, however, was a random dinner that suddenly happened on the last evening, permitting me to get to know in person the people I had admired on stage. Now today, HEDNA's mission is to simplify hospitality distribution through facilitating connections, education, and insights required for success in the ever-changing hospitality industry. And ever-changing it is. Our world is facing a profound crisis by COVID-19. The loss of lives is a tragedy. A remedy has yet to be found. Travel advisories and restrictions are in place in many regions and are only slowly being lifted. Conferences and events are rescheduled or canceled, or in our case, moved to HEDNA at home. Companies have started to close their offices, and most of ours are working from home. We have weathered many challenges before, and together we will overcome this. Travel will bounce back. Now let's talk about what HEDNA has been up to. HEDNA is closely collaborating with numerous industry associations and initiatives as we join forces to help move forward our industry. For instance, we are partnering with HTNG on a working group entitled Travel Safe that focuses on upgrading content and distribution to address consumer questions and concerns. We regularly exchange with HSMIA, Open Travel, VRMA on all of our initiatives and theirs, and discuss opportunities as they arise. Let's talk about HEDNA at Home. I'm super excited about this event. A shout out goes out to Audrey and Mike for putting together this event. They have worked tirelessly and diligently to bring you current and relevant content in the 2 hours ahead. Now, HEDNA at Home is only the culmination of efforts executed by the HEDNA community. We have and are still putting together a great webinar series. All of them are posted online on our website and accessible on HEDNA TV. HEDNA TV is hosted by YouTube and has grown in the last 3 years to a library of more than 100 videos with over 40 hours of amazing content. These are keynotes, these are thought leaders sharing their views and perspective on what is happening, what is changing, and what is becoming the new norm. I invite you to check it out, subscribe to it. And so far, it seems you're enjoying this content. Close to 4,000 viewers have watched more than 400 hours of content only in the last 90 days. Let's talk about numbers and budgets specifically. HEDNA's board of directors has always been fairly conservative and cautious in their spending and maintained a safety net to be used on a rainy day. Well, it is raining now, and we're in a good position, a decent position, if you will, to weather this storm throughout 2020 and into 2021. An organization such as HEDNA, however, wouldn't be possible without the support of its members and sponsors. On behalf of HEDNA, thank you for your continuous support. We hope to meet you in 2021 in places such as Miami, Vienna, and Bangkok, where we plan to organize events and conferences. Our conference planning team is closely monitoring the situation to plan effectively ahead and making sure that everything is working out. Let's talk about working groups. Mike and Audrey will provide a detailed update on the progress that we've made with each working group a little bit later in this session. This is really where HEDNA comes to life and where our members collaborate together to bring forward our industry. It is amazing to see the collaboration and exchange of ideas, and then ultimately the distribution of new knowledge that is being shared with the broader community. If you haven't done so, go check them out and join the efforts of these working groups. They're amazing learning opportunities for everyone involved. We also want to hear from you. As we plan our programming and strategic outlook, it has become critical to HEDNA to continue to service its membership and to remain relevant for the future. And Cole has been driving this initiative to solicit your feedback. Look out for a survey hitting your inboxes in a few days. In advance, I appreciate your participation and time in this important research. Let's talk about the program ahead of us. Thank you to all the speakers who are donating and giving their time and resources and efforts in order to create this amazing schedule. Katie, I can't wait to listen to your update. Where and when will travel resume? Look at the roundtable, Rajesh, Tracy, Carol, Andrew, moderated by Henry Hardefeld. If they cannot address your questions, I don't know who will. So do challenge them. And do submit your questions using the Q&A function. And lastly, the session on data analytics. I can't wait to pick the brains of Richard, Alex, Gino, and Matthew. One question I have for them: if there is no precedent, where there is no historical data, how important is access to real-time information? How do we make it possible? And how do we make it accessible? In closing, I would like to thank our annual conference partners. Without them, this would not be possible. They are Adyen, Amadeus, Derbysoft, Ideas, and RateGain. With that, thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you enjoy HEDNA at home. Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome back. As Sebastian shared in his President's Welcome, HEDNA at Home is thrilled to have Katie Morrow, VP of Data Partnerships at TravelClick, an Amadeus company, as our keynote speaker today. Katie is a recognized leader in hospitality industry benchmarking and data analytics. Katie will present the very latest aggregated data and trends as hospitality gets back to the business of serving our guests. I'll hand it over to you, Katie. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for having me. If we could just allow me to share the screen. Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead. And I'll just verify with you, Audrey, please, if you could just confirm that you can see my screen.
I can see your screen.
Perfect. Great. Well, again, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about data, my favorite topic. I'll take you through the next 30 minutes. We will look at market performance. So based on the registrants of today, I picked markets that I think will be able to accommodate many of you. And if not, you can always reach out to your local Amadeus or TravelClick representative after to get any local market information that may help you as you start to build your recovery. I'll talk about some high-level advice or considerations for building your recovery roadmap. I know that that's well underway now. And for the first time that we've spoken about this, since COVID started, I will discuss some channel information. So I think you'll find that very insightful as you start to talk about your distribution strategy moving forward. And so some of those things maybe you haven't started to think about as granular as that. So maybe after today, you'll start to think about how you can have the right data to be able to think about the distribution strategy. And then as Audrey mentioned at the beginning, I'll leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A in case you have any questions. So market performance. So I think it's good. I'm not sure if everyone on the phone or in the audience is a customer of TravelClick. So I'll talk a little bit about the data that I'm going to show so that it's very clear about the data that we're talking to. So we are actually showing here on the books data. So this isn't any forecast or anything like that about what's going to happen in a market. This is strictly on the books data that we get from about 40,000 hotels globally that participate in our Demand 360 product. So again, it's on the books data. We get group block, group pickup, or sold reservations against a block, and then also all transient reservations across all channels. So we have this looking out a year as well as historically. So without further ado, let's look at some data. So I think it's good to start kind of high level here and just understand what has happened, right, in the past few months. I think it's crazy to think how much has changed in such a short period of time. So if you look back in January of this year, what we're looking at here is net booking activity. So this is, the green line is the net reservations, which is reservations after cancellations. And if you look in January, for the week of January 5th, for any future date, about 12 million reservations were made in that week globally for all future stay dates. And that's based again on the data that we have from our participating hotels. So you can see, very strong, as we know, 2019 was a very strong year. And then you can start to see as you get into, end of February, beginning of March, where of course China was already impacted and we were starting to see really the rest of the world become impacted by COVID-19. And it's really, to me, mind-blowing to see on March 15th what happened, right? We were down 5 million reservations, meaning we had more cancellations than reservations in that week for any future date. So the good news is that we are on a positive trend here. And as of May 31st of that week, we booked about 3 million reservations for any future stay date. So I know it's kind of hard to see that number there, but it's about 3 million. So we're nowhere near the 12 million that we were pre-COVID, but we are seeing positive signs of a recovery. And I really feel that when you start to look at year over year, it's very hard to understand where we are because the numbers are so drastic. So I really like to be able to see what's happening from a net booking activity and are we seeing positive growth. So you'll see more of this as we go through, as we talk about local markets. So another thing I find very interesting here, so what we're looking at is, again, from the beginning of this year, really out through the end of the year, December 27th, 2020, that week. And you can see when the year started, some of those occupancy numbers that we were looking at in the high 60s, mid 70s, and how it started to taper off for this year, right when you start to see COVID happen. So I should back up and explain too that what we're looking at here is transient and group sold reservations. I chose to leave the group block numbers out because what we're finding in the data is that, especially as you look into Q3 and Q4, people are not necessarily removing their blocks from the system, or they haven't moved them yet to the new date that they're working on for a certain meeting or event. So I wanted to leave that out just to not to skew the numbers. So what we're looking at is group sold, which would be pickup, and then all transient reservations. So you can obviously see the big gap between last year and this year as we started to get more into COVID as it grew globally. But my point here really is when you're looking at the future dates, and even in your own pace report or your brand pace report that you may be looking at, you kind of start to look into the future and you say, those pace numbers seem okay. But what I'm going to show you today is we're not seeing that long-term activity, meaning bookings happening outside of 90 days. So there's not a lot of activity going on in the second half of the year. And so I think it's really important for us today. We'll focus more on the summer months because obviously the booking window as we know it has completely changed and we're in a very short booking window. So I'll take you here. So I thought it would be good just to see from a region and country standpoint. So I just kind of picked again based on the registrants, pretty much all of the regions, and then a few specific countries again that we'll deep dive into throughout the next 20 minutes or so. So you can see this is from June 7th through September 12th. So I know, more from a US mindset, I would say we kind of did this right around the US holiday of Labor Day, where we still see a lot of leisure travel happening. So that's how we kind of determine the dates there. But you can see from an occupancy standpoint how the regions are doing, and then also the individual countries. So you can see, United States pretty strong at 8.5%. Even Canada looking better at almost 6%. But we'll see in just a minute how definitely Canada still has some room to grow as far as their net bookings. Okay, so again, we'll start with the United States and we'll do a deep dive here, and then we will move to some of those other countries that I mentioned. So this weekly net booking activity, similar to what we looked at right at the beginning, I think is very interesting. So for the United States overall, pre-COVID, we were looking at about 6.5 million reservations made each week. And you can see how we had the decline and then obviously positive movement every week since April 12th. So that's fantastic. And hopefully we'll continue to see that grow. So now at about 2.5 million reservations, again, that week of May 31st. So here we picked some major markets, obviously, to look at because that's really what people are mostly asking about or typically asking about. But what we're seeing in the data is the strongest occupancies are not in these major markets. They are in resort type markets. I would say, for people in the United States, really that Florida Panhandle, South Texas, and then even in some of like the Midwest, you're starting to see, some more leisure activity happening. That's where we're seeing the strongest occupancies, and in some cases up to 60% transient occupancy in some of those markets. But for the sake of today, looking at some of the major markets, I think is interesting to understand how are the major markets faring from a transient standpoint. And of course, we'll continue to monitor that to see as we get more into the summer and people maybe have a different comfort level with traveling. And as we move into the different phases, depending on the city of recovery, we might see these numbers start to grow. Okay, so I'm about to get complex here, but I really wanted to share this data. So I'm going to do my best to explain. There is the Q&A button. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask it. But I really wanted you to understand what we're seeing from a data standpoint for channel information. So before I even get started, I just want to be clear that right now I'm only showing online channels, right? So I chose not to put in any direct business or any call in if there's like a central reservation system. I chose not to put those in, obviously because I feel like the online channels are the most impactful. So what we have done is really created our own index. And what we did is compare the daily net occupancy pickup for each specific future date range. So what we're saying is in this yellow highlighted box, that in this 0 to 7 day booking window, we are booking 60% of the amount of bookings we booked last year for that same period. Okay, so again, we're booking 60% of the transient bookings that we booked last year in that booking window. And then you're able to see by the individual channels. So brand.com is booking a little over 50%. The OTAs are booking about 70% of what they booked last year for this booking window. And then the GDS, knowing that corporate travel is still, not yet completely back, is at about 25% of what they booked in that same booking window last year. So what you'll find is how I talk about each region is different because it's very local in the recovery, right? And so when you look here in that 0 to 7 day index, the OTAs are booking more compared to brand.com as an index to last year. And then if you look in the 8 to 14 day, they're closer. And then the 15 to 30 and the 31 to 90 booking windows, brand.com exceeds OTA. So I'd say this because when people are talking about, and I'll talk about this more at the end a little bit, but when you're talking about your marketing activity and investing in media and those types of things, I think it's critical to know which channels are booking your markets and when are those bookings coming in. So I think this could be very insightful. And do I know why it is the way it is? No. My hypothesis is that people who are more concerned with safety in the hotels and the cleanliness and all of those things are looking more on brand websites and maybe planning a little bit more further out and getting comfortable with a vacation, where people maybe who are just last minute wanting to get out, they could typically use OTAs more. But I thought this was very interesting, especially from a marketing standpoint and how you choose to invest in your media, as I know many people are already doing that or definitely planning on it. So a lot of the times we look at lead time, actualized data. That's how we typically do it in any of our products. But because the business environment is changing so rapidly, that we thought it was really critical to understand the metric as it's evolving over time. I'm going to look and see. I did get one question there. And the reason I'm going to stop, I just want to make sure that it's not something that's not understanding. Okay, so no, it's not that. So we'll come back to that question potentially. Okay, so maybe if I can, there we go. All right, so moving on to Canada. So you can see for Canada from the net booking activity, you know, in 300,000 range is where they were pre-COVID, and we're 3 weeks of positive booking activity, which is fantastic, and up to about 34,000 bookings for the week of May 31st. And again, just looking at the summer occupancies, you're able to see some of the major markets, Vancouver leading that at about 8% occupancy. And then you see some of the other markets there and how they're faring. So keep in mind that those bookings are spread across, those 34,000 bookings are spread across the whole country. We're just, you know, taking out some top markets to be able to understand those occupancies. Okay, so again, you know, going back to the same information, and so you can see here very similar. So in North America overall, what we're seeing from a channel standpoint in these booking windows is similar. When we look at, you know, Europe in a minute, it's a little bit different. But you can see here again that in the 0 to 7 day booking window, the OTAs are exceeding brand.com as, you know, compared to last year from an index standpoint. And as you move further out, similar to what I mentioned in the United States, that the brand.com becomes a little bit stronger in the further out booking periods. Okay, so moving on to China. So I think it's always important. I don't know how many people in the audience are from China, but I think it's always important just to understand what's happening in China. And I think the next slide will be even more telling and you'll be able to see, and I want to spend a little bit of time on that. But what you're looking at here is the activity from pre-COVID, and then China only spent really a very short time in the negative before coming back to positive net bookings. So from February 16th all the way through to May 31st, they've increased, and they're at about 650,000 net bookings as of that week. So getting very close to pre-COVID numbers. And again, looking at some of the main markets in China, you can see their occupancies. And it's interesting, right? Because you're looking at this 650,000 bookings, and then you're looking at kind of these small occupancy numbers. And for me, when I first see the data, I start to question that. How do you have so many bookings with such small occupancy? Well, first, as I mentioned, obviously those bookings are spread all across China, not just in these markets. But then what even makes it more clear is that in China, you're starting to see more recovery further out. Right? So if you're looking, if your eye just goes directly to that 31 to 90 day window, if you remember in the United States and Canada, we're nowhere near the total transient being about 45% of what we did last year. So for me, as I'm watching this data change every single day, this is very exciting because although that 0 to 7 day booking window is great, right? We'll take in the occupancy, you know, right? We want that occupancy. It's hard to ever catch up to last year if you don't have business on the books. And it's also hard to not have pricing power when you don't have business on the books. So when you look at China, who's obviously ahead of most of us in the recovery, although this is mostly domestic China travel, you're starting to see that outside of that 15-day kind of standard booking window, they're starting to see business pick up there. So for all of you who are in other parts of the world, this is something positive to see, right? It seems like that short-term booking window comes back hard and fast, and then what follows is kind of the longer booking window. So it's very good to see that, in my opinion. Okay, so moving on to Europe. So we'll start with Spain here. So Spain spent a number of weeks in the negative from a net reservation standpoint. And at the end of May, that turned around. So May 24th, it was just positive, 266 reservations. And then May 31st, it was a little bit higher at 3,000 reservations. So of course, we'll continue to monitor that, make sure that week over week, we're starting to see continued growth. And I think based on everything I'm hearing, having an office in Spain and an employee in Spain, that we're definitely moving in the right direction. So hopefully we'll continue to see that. But what I found interesting is if you look at these major markets in Spain, you obviously see that the more leisure markets are seeing stronger occupancy than Barcelona and Madrid. So because of the summer months and people still probably vacationing similar to what they would typically do if they were staying, within their own country, they're going to these maybe southern Spain cities, more beachy type things that we're also seeing in the United States. So I think that's very interesting from a summer standpoint. It probably fits in line with what we normally see, obviously at lower numbers, but you can definitely see that that's kind of a global thing, that people are traveling to more resort areas. So again, like I mentioned, it's different, right? When we look at the information in Spain, and I think we'll see similar in the UK, that the OTAs really are stronger, again, from an index standpoint than brand.com, really all the way through that 30-day booking window. You don't see brand.com ahead until the 31 to 90-day booking window. So again, if you are a hotelier in Spain and you're thinking about, investing in media or doing impressions on an OTA, I think it's critical for you to understand, where is your business coming from? And this also could be an opportunity to look at your brand.com. What are things that you could do to maybe increase that as well? So definitely, I think a good opportunity to kind of take a step back, look at what's going on in your local market, and then either look at ways to change your strategy potentially, or if you're looking to book business, which I know most people are, what can you start to do on the OTAs because they're showing a lot of strength. Okay, so then the UK here, you can see, again, similar to Spain, it's only been a couple of weeks of positive growth. So May 24th, we turned it around, 5,000 positive reservations. And then you see that increase again the week of May 31st. And so again, hopefully we'll continue to see that positive. So then you can also look, Leeds, London, Manchester, and even Bristol pushing, 5% transient occupancy for the summer months. And I think it's interesting, right? When you look at 5%, it seems low, but that's averaged across these next 3 months. If you looked at next week, it could be much higher from a transient occupancy standpoint because that booking window is so short. You're definitely seeing higher occupancies closer in than you're seeing further out. So here you can see, again, like kind of further to what I just said, you're really not seeing much business outside of that 15-day booking window. So those reservations that we saw on the last slide, right, this 12,000 up here on May 31st, you can tell is really focused in on the next 14 days. So this is really, again, kind of last minute travel. It's what we're seeing everywhere. It's no different in the UK. But brand.com is a little bit stronger here. So again, if you're in UK, maybe an opportunity to invest in digital media or those types of things to drive business to your own brand website. All right, so considerations for building your recovery roadmap. So I'll just spend a few minutes here and then we'll leave some time for Q&A. But I think it's really important to make sure that you take this data and say, okay, now what am I going to go back to my job and do, right? And so obviously this is more hotel focused, but I think that really if you're in any part of hospitality, you can start to think about, what am I going to do differently to try to make this, this industry do better over the next 3 months, 6 months, year. And so I think one thing is evaluate the changes in your market demand, your feeder markets, and then your activity in the competition. So I think that this kind of goes outside of some of the things I even talked about, but I think it's really important. So first of all, I mean, I did talk about market demand, right? It's changing. The way we see demand is completely changing, from the booking window to the types of use cases in hotels. Those types of things are changing. And also, I mean, if you've read anything on like Airbnb and some of those alternative accommodations, you're starting to see some strong comeback there too. And I think before, when demand existed for everyone, you didn't, as a hotelier, necessarily feel that impact of alternative accommodations. I think that that's going to change, at least in the short term. So that's something to consider. Then you talk about feeder markets. We'll be coming out in the next few weeks with more information about feeder markets. Obviously, we know that the travel right now is mostly domestic, but as a hotelier, whether you're in a major market or a resort area, where are your customers coming from? And I feel like, understanding the booking window, the channel, and where they're coming from, you would have a lot of information to create very targeted marketing efforts to be able to drive business to your hotel. So I feel like there's a lot of actually good opportunity as long as you have, the data to understand it and, make good decisions. And then competition activity, I talked about it just a second ago with the market demands, but I know that there are hotels being used for dorms, for colleges, to help people on the streets get off the streets. There's many use cases now that maybe didn't exist before. And so I think that when you're looking at your competitive set in any tool that you're using, it's important to understand what your competition's doing, and you may have to be willing to change your competitive set based on what's going on in the market. And of course, there are still hotels that are not opened yet, and so that's something to look at as well. So provide more value for your customers through inclusions, when you're talking about your rate strategy. So, I saw an interesting comment the other day, and I've mentioned this already, but I found it, it hit home, where, it's very easy for me to say, don't lower your rates. And I wish that we could not lower our rates, because I know how hard it is to come out of and recover from the rates being low. But I understand that people want to get their hotels open. They want to bring their employees back to work and drive occupancy any way they can. So I can appreciate that very much. But the thing is that especially in high demand markets, and if you're knowing the booking window and the channel, I feel like there's an opportunity for us as an industry to make sure that we are providing value to the customer by trying to save the rate, right? And so when you think about the fact that it's a drive market, why not include valet parking? Right? Very simple, but it's a good way to keep your ADR up, but it provides value to the customer, because you know that, especially if you're in a city, that they're gonna have to valet park their car. So I think some of those thoughts should be really part of your strategy, so we can continue to hold rate. I know it's not going to go back to pre-COVID, but so we're not actually lowering rates to the floor in the booking window, right? We know the booking window is 0 to 7 days. In some cases, it's 0 to 3 days. To lower rates in that period, I think is not always going to prove beneficial. And something to be mindful of too, as you saw when we looked, especially at the United States, when you're looking further out, you're getting a lot of that business from brand.com. Well, if you all of a sudden lower your rates 3 days prior to that guest arrival on the OTAs, how are, if they know that, they're going to cancel and potentially rebook at a lower rate in your own hotel. So you want to make sure that you're protecting that base business and those rates that you've already gotten, when you're looking right at that 0 to 3 day before arrival. And then last but not least, I think this is what we spent the most time on today, is really understanding the booking window by channel in your competitive set and your market to more effectively market to customers. I mean, the data is there. It's very clear on which channels are driving the business and what the booking window is. And now it's your opportunity to take advantage of having that knowledge to be able to drive occupancy to your hotel and try to create demand. I mean, there's a lot of search data out there, and if you're seeing that the searches are happening, then investing in some media may actually create demand, where I would say 2 months ago, I would have never said that. You're not going to create demand by running a marketing campaign. So I think there are some opportunities now as people start to really search and think about traveling again. So if you want any more information about some of our recommendations or insights into the recovery plan, here's the link to our site. I think just last week we worked with HSMAI and put together 3 ebooks around revenue management, marketing, and sales. And so those are available here as well as on HSMAI's recovery site. So that could give you some insights into some of the best practices. And I think that we have time for some Q&A. So I think I see a few questions. So I'm going to. Okay, good. First question is very, very good. So can you remind us of the mix of participants in Demand 360? How many major versus independent brands or independent hotels? It's a fantastic question, and I actually planned on mentioning that. So we're probably about 70% brand, 30% independent. In major markets, we're heavy on independent. So yeah, so it's a good percentage mix, I would say, in major markets. When you're talking about, outside of the United States and then secondary and tertiary markets in the United States, we're probably more brand heavy. Okay, so then the next question. China booking windows seem to increase for shorter lead times as at 120% compared to last year. Yeah, it's a very good point. And I didn't make it on the slide, but it's a very good point. So we're actually seeing that in quite a few markets, especially like I mentioned, some of these resort towns where in that 0 to 7 day booking window, the bookings are more than last year for that same booking window. And so China is seeing that. And so that short-term booking window recovery is quite strong in many markets. And so we sit there and say to ourselves internally, if you're above last year for every 0 to 7 day booking window, then you could do better than you did last year. That's not something I think we want to take the risk on. And I don't know at what percentage each hotel would have to be to say, okay, I can do better than last year. We really want to find ways to get that base business on the books even before group starts to really rebound. It's good to get that base business. But yes, very good point to bring that up, that China is up compared to last year as far as transient bookings in the 0 to 7 day booking window. So I think that, it could be a couple of things, right? Just the way the traveler's booking right now. And then also with the lack of group, there's more availability in the market than there could have been last year. So I think that probably those two play a big part in that. So I'm going to just put that I answered those questions. Have you seen any shift from traditional hotels to alternative accommodations? To be honest, I don't do as much of the research as I should with the alternative accommodations. I know that I've read a few articles in the past week that they're actually seeing strong demand. I imagine, there's 2 schools of thought, right? One is that the short-term rental, you're kind of more isolated, those types of things. And then hotels have more cleanliness policies around them. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I do believe as a hotelier, if you weren't paying attention to it before, you should be paying attention to it now to understand, what kind of occupancies and demand are they driving, and are they going to take away from the little bit of demand that exists today? So I definitely think it's important to pay attention to. The next question, what is the mix between midweek and weekend? Assume that leisure has likely more weight for now. Yeah, definitely. I mean, you see it more on the weekends, especially like holiday weekends. For the United States, I imagine as we come into 4th of July, Canada Day coming up in the next couple of weeks, we'll see that strong leisure business on the weekend. But for whoever asked that question, if you're looking for a specific market, please reach out. We can definitely segment the data by week and weekday to give you more insight if you're interested. May we get a copy of this presentation? Audrey, I don't know if you could answer, but I'm fine with it if I can send it to you and you could.
Absolutely, we will be sharing, we can share it. Thank you so much, Katie. And then we will also be posting the entire session. So thanks.
Absolutely. Okay, I don't know how much time I have left for questions. I have a few more. Should I keep going or?
Take one more, Katie. We're
okay.
Almost on the time, but take
okay.
one more, please.
Okay, so well, the next one was, do you have similar stats about Dubai or UAE market in terms of recovery? Yes, we do. So if you don't know who your local TravelClick or Amadeus representative is there, please send me a note. I'm happy to help you get that information. And then how does OTA versus brand compare versus last year? Looks like OTA share based on your numbers are increasing overall. So what I showed was an index compared to last year by channel. So it depends on how many reservations were booked last year for that channel, right? But Nicholas, if you have specific questions, there are other ways I can show that data. It becomes even confusing for myself sometimes, which is why I didn't put it in the presentation today. But if you wanted to reach out on a specific market, we can get it more in like a percentage standpoint as opposed to an index. So if you want to come to me separately on that, we'll be happy to help you with that too. Okay, I think that's it for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. Thanks for providing such an in-depth update on the travel trends your organization is monitoring for the entire industry. And thank you very much for that recovery plan. I think everybody's going to be out there grabbing at that quickly, and they probably already started. This is the type of information that is critical as the industry rebounds. And then just as a reminder, as the questions came in, each of the sessions today, including Katie's, will be made available within the next couple of days on YouTube. And Katie, as Katie had mentioned, she is willing to share the deck, and we will make sure that is posted and available for everybody. So thank you again. So we are almost right on time. I'm so excited. I was a little worried about that. So next, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Henry Hartfelt, President of Atmosphere Research Group and a travel industry analyst. Henry will be hosting one of our best rated sessions that we've had in previous conferences. He's going to talk to thought leaders and get what is on their minds today as we are working on recovering from COVID. So Henry, welcome and thank you so much.
Audrey, thank you, and hello to everybody. It's a pleasure to join you today. I'm in San Francisco. We have a terrific panel of 4 industry thought leaders, including 2 former HEDNA presidents, Rajesh Vora, who's director at Sarova Hotels, Carol Hulsel, who is founder and CEO of Dragonfly Strategists, plus Andrew Rubinacci, Chief Commercial Officer at Omni Hotels and Resorts, and Tracy Mercer, who is SVP Lodging, Ground, and Sea at Sabre Travel Network. So a terrific group of people with genuine global perspectives. And on the heels of Katie's wonderful presentation, I'd like to start out our conversation by asking the panelists, as we recover and progress from what we have been going through as a result of the pandemic, we know this won't be an overnight recovery, but will be a complex process. I'm curious what you all see as steps in this process that you and your organizations are looking at, because chances are, I think very likely, what you guys are exploring is also on the minds of our audience. Importantly, what benchmarks do you think are going to be most important? So I open it to anyone on the panel who would like to take the question first.
Sure, I'll have a go. So thank you for inviting me, Henry. It's kind of odd to do a HEDNA conference online. For me, HEDNA's been all about all the bits that happen outside of the conference area. So, this is a strange experience, but thank you nonetheless. So I think one of the things that we talked about in preparation for this session, and I think Katie brought up very clearly in her session, is that things are very, very localized. And so I think what was going to look important to the UK market is going to be different to what looks important to other parts of continental Europe, and certainly seems to be very different to what looks important in Asia and in North America. From a European/UK perspective, we have our green shoots are very small and they're just about green. And so we have a long, long way to go. And what benchmarks we're monitoring at the moment, we're just looking to see if there's people exist. And it's really I mean, honestly, it's like that. So we're putting out, marketing messages, promotional material, and just to test the water to see what is people's appetite for travel, because we just really don't have anything. I know Katie showed some numbers for the UK, but that stuff is really only essential workers, what she showed on the chart, because it's all 0 to 7, 0 to 14 days. We don't have any opening dates before the 4th of July at the earliest in the UK. So whatever is there is only what's open for essential workers. There are only people allowed to stay in hotels at the moment. So I think probably our key metric is going to be bookings and pace of bookings. That for us is we're kind of almost agnostic about ADR. We're pretty agnostic about occupancy, if I'm honest. We really just want to see, do people exist and what's their appetite like, and when do they want to book for? What's the window? What's their booking window look like? Which seems to be, from Katie's presentation, pretty damn short.
I mean, I would add to that in the U.S. market, where most of Dragonfly's clients are, that local aspect by city is truly, truly important. And, we are seeing significant pickup in resort destinations in Florida, for example, 100% weekends. So in those markets, we can't lose sight of ADR, occupancy, the traditional measures, getting back to the basics of, driving RevPAR. But it has to be a local strategy. And so you have to look at, what is the opportunity locally to drive business. New York City, where I'm based, is very, very different. And we've barely opened up. Many hotels have stayed open, but they've been only really for essential workers. And there is very little demand right now for July and August here. So, we're seeing some in September and beyond. But of course, much lower than anticipated. So, strategies that we're taking is, making sure that 365 days out, we're price positioned correctly, looking at, what our comp set is doing. Are they even open? And have they adjusted their price position? Are we in line? And you have to be looking at that further out window, even though there are last minute bookings. What we saw in Florida, for example, was as soon as things opened up, immediately we just got all these bookings and we started filling up. So we don't want to be positioned from a price standpoint in the wrong place once it does release. So, I would say I was president of HEDNA at 9/11, had to make the decision to cancel the HEDNA conference, which was supposed to be in Rome 5 days after 9/11. We, even though this is deeper and worldwide impact that this is having, we had to get back to basics after that. We couldn't lose sight of the fact that we need to communicate with our customers. We need to price position correctly. We need to still revenue manage, even though some people think it's irrelevant right now, it's not. And we've got to be positioned from a marketing standpoint for local traffic to come back first. So those are the things we're focused on.
So I'd like to just ask a follow-up question because, never or very rarely have we ever heard comments such as ADR is less important or doesn't really matter. Now, I understand why you say that, but, how do you explain this to your owners? What points are you making to them? How do you help them understand how non-normal things are and why we need to get them to potentially understand why we are looking at these non-traditional metrics or downplaying some of the traditional metrics?
I'll take that. I mean, I've got one main owner. We've got a couple others that we partner with. I think the point was made in April when revenues went to zero. You know, everyone's really appreciative to have anything right now, and you know, we went in to Carol's point with a you know, not a low rate, but just a base rate, not a summer rate, not a weekend rate for our resorts. And when we opened up, I just actually took them up again today to $50 for all the resorts across the board, above where we would normally be at this time of the year. It really is a bizarre market. Everything's around marketing, no group sales. So sales is obviously not dead. We got to get to sales, and it's all future stuff. But for the next, you know, 3 to 6 months, it's going to be around marketing, short-term stuff. We opened a hotel yesterday with almost nothing on the books and had a ton come in, 25, 30 rooms last night came in. But it was, you know, you're like, well, should we open or not? Well, I think we can lose less if we open, and actually we did okay. Yeah. So, you know, I think the traditional metrics of what's the booking path and all that stuff, it just isn't the same. We're kind of fighting our way through. You know, is it TSA arrivals? Is it flights into the market? Is it you know, web search obviously is a new tool that is much more powerful than it was during the last few downturns. So it's a lot of different things that we're taking a look at, which is different. And the owners, I think, are coming along. As long as you take them and give them the information, I think they're good with it.
Yeah, and I think
and
also,
Henry, I would say we have a hotel in Florida, a resort in Florida, that's actually going to end June better than what they budgeted last year when they budgeted, and better than last year. And that pickup has all been in the last 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
So so there again, you know, what Rajesh said about being local with what we're doing and really focused on what's happening in each market. We can't give an anecdote for every market on a global basis because it is so different market by market. So you have to really be attuned to that. And I think owners, you know, a lot of owners I work with, they want cash flow right now. So, you know, that's their focus is what's my cash flow? How much am I getting in? You know, how can I pay the mortgage? How can I pay employees? How can I bring the teams back? So, you know, I think if we focus on that, many of them are going to be very comfortable with the fact that we're getting cash in the door.
I think as an industry, we have to really challenge ourselves to look outside of our industry and not look at the traditional benchmarks of ADR, occupancy, et cetera, and actually step way back and say, we're monitoring things like government regulations. Are we even open for travel? Can people even come in? The first thing you're going to start to see is where are restrictions being lifted? And is it likely it'll be local restrictions first, intra-country, intracontinental, and then global. And as we start to see that, it's going to open up different feeder markets and different channels. Liquidity is king in a time like this. And when liquidity is king, you have to get in what you can get in. And I also think we are fighting against fear. And once those regulations open, we have to put a process in place that is adopting some way and some form to give reassurance and reduce the fear level for those who aren't yet traveling. I think what we're hearing is those who are antsy and are stuck in their houses and are ready to get out, you open up and all 25 or 30 of them book, or we sell out a hotel. But the reality is we need a hell of a lot more at a hell of a lot longer time to get this industry back in. How are we as an industry going to help address that fear? And I think the safe stay programs and a variety of other cleaning things that Andrew was talking about, just that local marketing to sort of reassure people is going to be incredibly critical.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to your question, Henry, about taking owners along is we've never had a time where there's zero base business, right? And I think that's the kind of thing, that's the thing that scares everybody to hell. Where, you know, as Tracy said, liquidity is king, as you know, Carol and Andrew indicated, it's all about getting some cash through the door. We've got basic bills to pay. And at the moment there's no cash, then any cash is worth something. And I think that's kind of the reason why I said something somewhat controversially that we're kind of ADR agnostic, because we just want to see that people are interested in moving, and we want to see that they feel safe to travel, and that we've given them enough reasons to think that it's a good idea. And that to us is everything at this stage.
Absolutely.
So to that
and I agree with that. But what I said before about, and Andrew mentioned, as we see a market coming back, we can't lose sight of ADR then. So, it's kind of a twofold. Like, of course, the demand has to start returning first, right? But then I don't want the message to be, don't worry about your rate at all, because once we do start building, we have to start again worrying about our rate, right? And where we're selling, and what impacts that demand, what's slowing it down? Is it slowing down at all? Can we get even more rate? We've got to, we have to focus on that, of course. So it's, as we all know, none of us have ever been in this situation before. I think, one of the things we have to do as companies is, from that safety standpoint, we have to start having conversations with people at big corporations. My husband works for a very, very large corporation that does business with hotels worldwide, big group business, big business travel. And they've stopped all travel now and all conferences now through like next June. And I'm just like, why? So we have to partner with some of these companies to figure out what is going to make you comfortable to send your employees on the road again.
Right. Well, that's actually a good segue into the next question I'd like to get your perspectives on, which is which channels and which segments do we believe will be the fastest to recover? There's been a lot of discussion about business travel, and here we all are on Zoom. And will business travel be as strong as it once was? Meetings, conferences, and conventions, what will that recovery look like? What will the pace of it look like? Obviously, science and epidemiology, two words we really didn't discuss a lot within the travel industry, are now kings and queens of this recovery. And there's an article today in the Wall Street Journal about what will business travel recovery look like. There's a huge amount of debate about this. Our research shows that travelers and travel managers think there will be a recovery to pre-pandemic levels, but it will take time, of course. CEOs seem to have a different opinion. So let's just take a look at it. Where do you see what will lead the recovery? And importantly, what segments, which channels will be first, and which channels may be lagging?
I think right now answering this question is like, it's equivalent to, I don't know, belly buttons. Everyone has an opinion on how this is gonna happen.
Yeah, Tracy, you sit over one of the biggest belly buttons out there, Sabre. I mean, you can look at the
Thank
at
you.
the data and take a look at the pace and things like that. So I realize that none of us have a crystal ball, but where do we see the results coming from? Whether it's from the data you see on bookings or research you may have conducted or other dynamics.
Well, I'll talk about the U.S. market. Well, we mentioned leisure travel. Leisure travelers are fine. What scares me is the Tuesday after Labor Day. That's when I get really scared. Business travel isn't coming back anytime soon. We have very, very, very little on the books now. Groups, they're gone through the summer. We've got a couple trickling in. We actually had an incentive trip last weekend at one of the resorts. They said they were coming hell or high water, and they came. So there'll be a little, but it's 95% less. And my concern is that's not going to change really all that much through the rest of the year. Maybe we'll get a 20% of the group we had if things go really well in Q4. So you're really reliant on leisure travel and business travel. Even if people want to come back, and let's say there's a vaccine, everything's good. Companies have been drastically hurt with this. All the travel budgets have been cut to zero. Well, let's just be clear. So it's going to be a really, really tough fall. Hopefully we get back to some normalcy in 2021 at some point. But as far as business travel and group, it's just not not happening anytime soon.
Yeah. I think we're seeing very similar. Obviously, at Sabre, we're heavily tilted for our lodging occupancy into the corporate and business travel space. And we do see this term green shoots is popping up everywhere, but we do see some green shoots. Yesterday, we have a new content services for lodging platform, which is sort of a source agnostic platform that we're offering to agencies. And it was actually our largest booking day on this new technology yesterday.
Wow.
So that's really surprising. I also believe we're seeing cancellation rates that are quite high as well. So the extent that there is confidence and then we pull back, confidence and then we pull back. From a segment level, though, I think the economy and mid-scale, well, particularly the mid-scale hotels are going to do the fastest recovery. Super high-end hotels I'll be curious to see if they will suffer from the same consequence as was done post-financial crisis, when the perception of a 5-star was sort of not well appreciated in the business. It sort of had a taboo title to it if you stayed at a 4 Seasons in that sort of financial crisis time. I don't think that will happen here. So we will see a bit of a mix shift. And referring earlier to a question, there was a comment around, are we seeing something different with private accommodations, Airbnb, VRBO, that sort of thing?
Right.
We are seeing steady recovery in that, and seeing that obviously tilts more towards leisure. What we've also seen, which relates to what segments are recovering, is a step change in the adoption of work from anywhere technology and virtual technologies, as we're seeing here. We probably made a 5-year step change advancement in the adoption of these technologies. And that's going to materially change how you think about business travel, group travel, and how it's mandated. So not only are we coming out of this with probably a smaller corporate entity or corporate circle because of lack of liquidity, there's going to be a material reduction in companies that are out there. But once that corporate and business travel is back, there's going to be a reasonable reduction in the shape of that, given this adoption in technologies. That's my hypothesis. My belly button, I guess.
Tracy, I agree with you on that. I think, so many companies had digital efforts in place to migrate live training to digital training and webcasting and all of that. And the escalation of how rapidly they've gotten to that in the last 90 days has been unbelievable. Mm-hmm. So it's going to materially change conferences in the future, where there may be a mix of, on-site and virtual, and our hotels are going to have to be prepared to support that technologically. And there's just going to continue the evolution that should have or would have taken 5 years, like you said, has happened in pretty much 90 days.
Yeah, I think there'll be a blended solution too, right? So I think there'll be attendees and virtual attendees, and we need to be ready and ratchet it up to get ready for that. But I refer to the comment I made at the beginning, which is that this is a strange HEDNA conference for me. And when I said at that, at the beginning, that there's what I find most valuable out of the HEDNA conferences is almost the sessions that happen around the sessions and not the sessions themselves. And I think that kind of, I know officers we call them water cooler moments. I don't know what the conference equivalent is. The snack bar moment or whatever it is. But that bit where you sit and have a coffee with somebody that you bump into and you talk business and you learn stuff and you network. And I think, so I do agree that there are certain types of business, and Carol's right. I think training is a classic where, a lot of that will happen online. But would we want to do every HEDNA conference virtually? I suspect not. This is a poor substitute for what a HEDNA conference provides. And so I don't think long-term, maybe short-term until we have a better way of working, but I think long-term, this will come back. So there'll be certain segments which will definitely rebound, but I'm not sure that all of them will.
So let me ask a question about the recovery in terms of channels, since we are distribution focused. Which channels are you seeing perform better? What opportunities does this crisis create in terms of driving your distribution to the channels that you feel produce the best return? Rajesh and Andrew, I'd like to start with you two, since you are our hotel operators.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Google, as I said, it's all about marketing. Sales, while not dead, it's not king any longer. And for an upper upscale luxury hotels that rely 50% on group, sales was a big piece of what we did. So it is all about marketing and those marketing channels that you can go ahead and use and target. So social has become really, really important, especially when you talk about hitting local people. You can really target them. Google, those types of things. OTAs are of course important, but they go out to broad masses, and they have very little targeted stuff that you can really use compared to some of the other channels that are out there. And then obviously, direct channels and driving things there. So it is a bit of mix, and I think it is changing from what it was, 3 months ago, where more social, more, search and different types of things are really paying off compared to what we've even done a couple of billboards, believe it or not. Just because we know we've got a resort outside of Austin. If I hit the right markets in Dallas and the right markets in Houston, as people are driving and thinking about getting out of the house, and they've been successful. So it's really changed quite a bit, and I wouldn't have done that 2 months ago.
Rajesh?
Yeah, I think the advertising mix I don't want to speak to, because I think it's kind of outside of what I get involved in on a day-to-day basis. But in terms of the mix of distribution channels, I think we are, because we know that the MICE business or convention business and whatever is going to be slow. Andrew's absolutely right. The work of the sales team to bring all that stuff in is not there. It will be there again, but it isn't there today. And so it's all about transient. And I don't know whether the consumer thinks as deeply about booking an OTA versus booking a brand.com as we would like to believe that they do. I think they kind of look for where they find their comfort place, or whether that's because they recognize the OTA, or whether because they recognize the hotel brand, or whether it's because it's a good deal. And I think so. I think it's all about transient. I'm not sure that it's, there was much, foretelling of this might be the moment of inflection for the OTAs. I don't think that's the case. It might be, but I think there's evidence is very, very scant to represent that. And I think actually people don't think as deeply as we do about that channel. So I just think it's about transient channels, whatever they might be. And again, let's test the market and see which ones are prepared to move. Is it going to be the North American customer? I suspect not. Will it be the near Europeans? I'm talking the UK market. Yeah, sure, it might be. Almost certainly it's the other city centers in the UK that are going to move around themselves, right? People from Edinburgh to London and London to Edinburgh, vice versa, etc. And I think that's kind of where we see the market, at least in the short run. And I don't have any visibility more than 6 months out. And if anybody does, then they are welcome to explain, but I don't have any visibility further out than that. That's a long way to look at the
I did want to add one quick thing that I forgot. Our call center, believe it or not, in the last 2 weeks has beat the call volumes from last year, same time. So it's been, really shocking on how that's changed. And there's just a lot more questions. A lot of people are asking, how are you doing this? And a lot of people are ready to book, and conversions actually are, pretty good. So it's not just all questions they're hanging up. And it has kind of shocked me. We're up 9% last week over the same week last year, which was a bit shocking, and we're seeing the same thing happen this week. So it's interesting.
So Tracy, can I ask you, what is Sabre seeing from the travel agency channel? Because, one thing that I read early on that I haven't seen much about lately is that there were some challenges with people who had booked on the OTAs with getting service and getting cancels processed and getting money refunded. But when they had a travel agent representing them, that it actually was a better experience for them. Do you think that's going to play into it at all, Tracy?
I would love to say that's the case. Certainly, I think there's a different service level when you're using a travel agent. There's just that, to Andrew's point, there's a level of human connection that people want and human reassurance. Call center, travel agency, someone where I can talk to them is increasing in importance and relevancy right now. From an overall shift, though, the challenges we faced, Sabre as well as others, is that many hotels and many brands and many individual entities were closing and were closing in such rapid cadence because of the regulations. There wasn't time to notify all the travelers going forward, or there is still demand out there. We have medical travel, we have press travel, we have a variety of different types of travel that are still happening and coming through the corporate channel, as I mentioned. And so finding and ensuring that the hotel they're booking is actually really open and going to be open the day they show up and that something won't change has been something that we've been managing. And we're super dependent and working in partnership with our hotels and brands. And to be fair, when you're a franchise entity, representing your entire chain, you've got thousands of hotels. You don't necessarily know what each owner is doing. So it's a very dynamic. And I think that's where communication with all your distribution channels is going to be critically important to make sure that information is up to date and that we know what's going on.
So I just want to remind the audience, if you've got questions, please submit them through the Q&A button that you should find at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We'll be going to those in a moment. But before we do, another question for the panel. The recovery and our progress is a catalyst for change within our organizations. There is a critical need now for even closer working relationships between departments than has ever existed. Rajesh, as you said in our prep call, if we don't change now, we never will. But what do we change and how and why? I'll throw that open to the group.
Get rid of silos.
I beg your pardon?
Rajesh said, get rid of silos. I said everything. Yeah, I've been running around the building here saying we're a $2 billion startup. Everything's on the table. We're able to centralize more. We had things actually in finance and HR we were going to centralize. It was going to take 2 years. They'll be done in 3 months at the end, as we open up. I'm clustering sales operations in hotels. I've clustered more in revenue management. I've put together a field marketing group. I think everything should be looked at, and can you do something different, better, more efficient? Now's your opportunity to do it.
Yeah, we had lots of ideas about how things might improve, and there's always barriers, right? People love their silos and they love to hold on to their little area and their little pocket of comfort. And guess what? They're very pliable today. And that makes life much easier. And you can get across ideas and people are, I had a meeting with a group of housekeeping, executive housekeepers, changing of the way that we might run the housekeeping departments. There was not one dissenting voice. I promise you, 3 months ago, there would have been 200 reasons why we've always done it this way. That's just the way it is, right? And I think, so I think, yes, to Andrew's point, we're changing everything. We're looking at everything afresh. People are pliable, and needs must when the devil drives, right? You don't have one hat anymore. If you did, too tough. You're no longer. You have to wear multiple hats if you want to survive in this environment, and that's where it's at.
I think it's also a really important time to start saying, what are going to be my core competencies? What am I going to do? And what am I going to partner or outsource on? Because there's so many things that we've adopted as in my days as hoteliers, or even at the company that I'm at now, not running an individual hotel, but you adopt, you take on, you do in-house, when now's the time to step back and say, where can I partner? Where should I turn to a technology outsourcing or a partnership outsourcing or some sort of a hybrid model to focus on what I need to do and what I need to do well. Things like technology are incredibly important as we go forward. Providing a touchless end-to-end experience for travelers is likely going to be a necessity in the future. Providing an omni-channel experience with consistent content is going to be a need. And as you reflect on your organization, there's lots of reasons as to why I know this sits in marketing and this sits in revenue management and that sits at corporate. All of those silos need to be broken down. And I completely agree. We at Sabre have gone through a major, or in the midst of a major restructuring to organizationally realign and doing things that would have taken I don't know, 9, 10, 12 months and doing them in 6, 8 weeks to just accelerate it. It's amazing when your valuation as a company goes down and you have zero cash flows, how open people are to ideas of changing how you operate.
Yeah.
So it's been, in some ways, for those people who love change, it's been refreshing and exciting and stressful. For those people who don't like change and have historically been the ones saying this is how we've always done it, it has been probably pretty rattling to their core.
Correct.
Many of our hotels have taken this opportunity to say, how many times does a hotel literally get to shut down and completely reopen as if they're a brand new hotel? So, you know, what would we be if this hotel was just launching and didn't have history? What would we look at? How would we structure our teams? How would we structure our, as Tracy said, outsource versus in-source relationships? How would we work regionally or corporately or individually, independently? So, and you know, many of the GMs that we work with are saying this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to relaunch how we do business and to tear it down to there are no preconceived notions, which is, it's tough because people have to experience that change, and that may mean some resources are not coming back. I mean, there's a lot of change coming down the pike, but it's also a huge opportunity for us to reinvent how we do business.
So one last question before we go to the audience questions. How has this pandemic challenged you and changed you as leaders within your organization? What have you learned about yourselves, and what are you doing differently?
Initially, I learned that I can stay up all night to, you know, apply for things with the Small Business Administration and PPP, and I can stay up all night every night and actually win in the end because I did that first. Because I go into like fight mode when things get tough, right? So, but in the end, I think I've learned that listening and empathy go a really long way as a leader, and so really being able to listen to clients, to empathize with their situation, to show compassion, grace, is truly important when people all over the world are, you know, walking through the same thing. You know, we need to be leaders with a heart and with empathy.
Right. I think certainly compassion is a really good word. I completely agree. The other thing that I've learned, maybe not so much about myself, but about the people in our business, is that the people in our business love our business. And I think that I've really learned. And it's been the most heartening thing about this. And there's been plenty of dark days and plenty of trials and tribulations. But one thing I've really, really appreciated is how much our people love doing what they do and how much they miss it. And you know, that's not just about income and all the rest of it, because most of our staff are being looked after by the government anyway, even if they're not working. So it's not even about that. It's just about they want to be back at work. They want to see their colleagues and they want to look after guests. And that's the thing that I've learned above everything else.
For me, it was, you know, early on in the crisis, it was, if you could think it, you should do it. You know, things that would be unthinkable, you're like, well, maybe we should close a hotel, or maybe we should, you know, within 3 days, you're like, close them all. It was amazing the speed of change that happened. You know, so it was, you know, I know I'm the type of person who likes to take a breath, make sure we're doing the right thing. And, you know, it was, you know, interesting to just, you know, if you could think it, do it. And then obviously, you know, the impact on the people and it has been interesting to see other people's styles too, especially as you know, get out. And I've only been a year and a half in this company, so to see how people react to crisis, and some people, you know, do great, and some people you really have to pull along and help, and back to the compassion, because they're just as shell shocked as everyone else. So it's been, you know, definitely a growth experience for I think everyone involved.
I would totally agree. I think for me, initially seeing the stress behaviors across the industry, seeing those who were just denying what was going on for so long. I feel incredibly privileged to work for a company in which our CEO has lived through various and managed through various crises. And when you've been there, done that, that brings a level of calmness, of cool-headedness, and of focus. And that helped our organization to manage through that. Just clear, calm, focus, and relentless pursuit of the end goal. And I think it's important for all of us, no matter how bad it gets through this, there's a vision of what we want to do. And I think Rajesh and Andrew hit on this as Rose Carroll. People love this industry. And our teams love this industry. When I had to furlough an employee, she cried when I was telling her she was going on furlough. And she said, I'm crying, not because I'm leaving, I'm crying because I have such great projects that are going to now be delayed 3 more months. And it would really be better if I could just get them done. And that is just such a commitment to this industry that is something I've always loved. And I really loved seeing that come out of people. Unfortunately, it came out because of these circumstances. But yeah, I think that was some of the things that I learned through this. And for myself, that you can't move too quickly when crisis hits. It's right. You just get it done, because I love that line. If you can think it, do it, move quickly. And this certainly taught many of us that's the need.
We have a number of questions from the audience. I'll try to get through as many as we're able in the time we've got. There was a really good one from Ludovic, who asked, when do we see the recovery happening, getting back to 2019 levels of revenue and profit? We're somewhere, it seems like, between 20 and 50% or so of previous year levels. I'd like to get your perspectives. How long do you think this recovery will take?
I think it's localized, regionalized, as we said before. It's going to depend on where you are, what mix you hit, the regulations in your area. I can say for my area and kind of what we're looking at right now, we aren't, especially when you gave that caveat of profitability and revenue. Profitability may hit before some of it, honestly. If you take a lot of cost out, the costs are going to be slower to come back in. But if we're going to measure by RevPAR, it's in my opinion, it's 2023, which is depressing, but that's what I think.
I was going to say the same thing. Regionally based, we'll have some hotels that'll beat 2019 next year. But I think as an industry, it's probably 2023. To Tracy's point, profitability, though, will be sooner. We have learned how to operate hotels at 5%, 10%, 15% occupancy, all the way up, and really are pressure testing on what's really needed to give the guest experience you want. You have to do the experience, but it's dramatically different from what always was. And I think the profitability for the industry will be much better.
Okay.
Well, I think when you look at what Jan at STAR said, early on about the recovery after 9/11, then the recovery was extended after 2008, 2009. I think we're looking, I agree with Tracy. 2023 to get back to where we were. 2019, we were flat pretty much. To get to any type of growth, probably even further beyond that. But I can't see it coming back before 2023 unless some sort of miracle happens.
So yeah, I can't disagree with such an august body of leaders. I can't disagree with any of them. So I'm going to have to go with 2023 too, or else I'll look like the idiot.
We have an interesting question from Petya. What changes need to happen with the technologies that we are using for our distribution and other services? What in order to address our current and future challenges and needs?
Our challenges, our technology changes are mostly not in the distribution space. They're in the guest experience part. I think that's where we're really investing our time and money. It's about, how do we facilitate online check-in, which everybody seems to be very keen on now that they never were. and online checkout, and how do we and contactless experiences in all sorts of parts of the business. And that's that's with our own staff and with our customers. I think all of that was never a question before, or never a priority before. So I think that's where our technology investment is going to go into that side of the business, not in distribution.
All right. Well, I wish we had more time because I think we could certainly go on for several more minutes, but we don't, unfortunately. I would like to thank Carol, Tracy, Rajesh, and Andrew very much for your participation, for your great insights, for sharing everything that you did. I hope everyone in the audience found this useful. Audrey, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Henry. Thanks so much to all of our panelists. Truly amazing. That was fabulous. I could watch another hour of the questions and answering. So thank you. Wonderful, insightful information from our industry leaders that Henry was able to get together. I'm sure we got some information, lots of information that we can use as we navigate the new normal, both as the teams and the panelists said, both as leaders and team members, because maybe even though we're not a leader in our organization, we're a peer, we're a colleague, there's always opportunity to empathize and help each other as we get through COVID and we get through to recovery. So thank you again, Henry, and to all of our leadership panels. Much appreciated. Next, Mike Carlo, CEO of Exander Pay, and I would like to provide an update on the HEDNA working groups. I think Sebastian mentioned this in his welcome this morning. The working groups are really the heart and soul of HEDNA. They drive many critical initiatives for HEDNA as well as the industry at large. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Joe from Ewald if he can share the working group update.
Thanks for joining the HEDNA at Home Working Group update. My name is Mike Carlo. I am going to be providing some of the updates today. Also joining me, and you'll see her video pop up on some of the slides in a few minutes, is Audrey Moranti, who you've already seen today. Our goal today is to identify the latest that our working groups are working on, as well as some opportunities for us to engage our working groups with you over the course of the rest of 2020. So today we're gonna focus on 5 different working groups that have been very active over the start of 2020, as well as one very special guest star. The working groups that have been active are the Connectivity Group, the Hotel Analytics, Open Payment Alliance, Guest-Centric Payments, and Third-Party Compensation. With that, I'm going to ask Audrey to share a little bit more about a new group that's planned, as well as identify an update for the first couple on this list.
Thank you, Mike. And before we start with the working group updates, I did want to share some exciting news. HEDNA has actually launched a new Travel Safe Working Group initiative. As people start to travel again, consumer behaviors and expectations are going to change. We're going to have to drive new safety and health measures. From contactless access and sanitation to new search criteria and ratings, content will become even more critical so that as an industry we can build confidence. And of course, lead to the speed of our recovery. HEDNA is working collaboratively with other industry organizations such as HTNG to identify consumer confidence challenges, best practices, and initial communication successes. If you're interested in participating in this newly developed working group, please contact us at education@hedna.org. Thank you. Now I'd like to provide an update on the Connectivity Working Group. The Connectivity Working Group is responsible for identifying changes in shopping and buying models, system requirements, and the necessary technology for hotel distribution. Secondly, this group drives the evolution of today's approaches to those trends that are likely to emerge. The team then identifies the next steps that the industry will more than likely take toward future state, and finally provides guidance on the best approach for enabling change. In addition, as the industry recovers from COVID, the connectivity group is going to work to identify and help members and the industry find ways to maximize all channels to obtain maximum return on investment. So this group is also focusing on specific items that they can do to help members as we recover from COVID and the pandemic. As you can see, the connectivity working group has a lot going on right now. They continue to focus on driving connectivity initiatives that are important to our members and the industry. Should you have any questions on the connectivity working group, its projects, or want to learn how you can get involved, please contact the committee co-chairs. The committee co-chairs for 2020 for the connectivity working group are Lou from IHG, Jody from DerbySoft, and Scott, who's been a longtime co-chair also from IHG. Thanks. Next, I would like to share what the Hotel Analytics Working Group is working on for the industry and our membership in 2020. First, this group was developed to increase awareness and adoption of data analytics practices and tools. Secondly, to demonstrate how data analytics can improve hospitality and distribution. And to create recommendation and best practices for our members and the industry at large. For 2020, the team is currently working on creating and publishing an ebook through the development of quarterly blogs. The team is on target to develop 3 to 4 blogs each quarter, which will be bundled together and released as an ebook. The first 2 blogs created and published include analytics, reporting tools, and getting the most out of your BI teams. In addition, we have another 5 to 6 blogs actively in development. Well, as you can see, the Hotel Analytics Working Group has been very busy as well. And again, if you want to learn more or would like to contribute to the work underway, please contact the committee co-chairs. The committee co-chairs for Hotel Analytics include Matthew from Triometric, Connie from Accor, and Nitin from NTT Data. And now I'll send it back to Mike so he can review the payment working groups. Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey. The next working group we'd like to talk through is the Open Payment Alliance. And for those of you who aren't aware, the Open Payment Alliance is our working group focused on more efficient B2B payment processing among the industry's very significant volume of third-party bookings. Okay, maybe not a significant volume today, but it was in the past and it will be again soon. So we've had quite a lot of accomplishment with this working group over the past couple of years. We have taken the time to work with our membership to introduce a concept called the payment manager. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the payment manager has been designed to move payments into a separate process flow than bookings. So basically, our desire with this payment manager was to decouple the payment information from the booking flow so that we could actually have greater flexibility and greater efficiency in having those payments processed by the hotels. One of the great outflows of the payment manager is, and one of the mantras of the working group is fax-free by 2023. So our goal is to move away from the OTAs or agents having to fax information to the front desk about what is covered under a specific third-party booking. So we're really excited that that has been agreed to, and we've actually moved very far down the path of adoption. So as we were going through and designing this payment manager, it became very clear that we did need some element of technical standards in order to allow industry participants to have a consistent application of the solution. Specifically, I mean, at the front desk of a hotel, you want everything to be the same for every booking, for every check-in, because it makes their lives easier, it makes the guest experience better, and just there's a lot of benefit. And we could go on for another hour or two about the benefits, but I will not. I will update you that we have done We have a joint working group on technical standards for the payment manager with HTNG and Open Travel Alliance. The first API of the two we think we need to accomplish the payment manager has been completed. It's published. It's available for HEDNA and HTNG and OTA members. The first API takes the payment information and inserts it into the PMS and the CRS to make the whole check-in process easier. The second API is underway and we expect it to be published in the next few months. The goal of the second API is to make sure that from an agency, an OTA or agency or bed bank perspective, we're pulling the right and consistent information into the payment process flow. The role of HEDNA going forward is going to be to focus on adoption by the industry. We expect there'll be multiple payment managers. We have 2 in place today. The first 2 that have been working on the API standards and the co-chairs, which I'll talk about in a second. Well, I'll talk about now. The 2 co-chairs are D. Thomas from Onyx Center Source and Xavi Ginesta from the Voxel Group. They both have committed to using their businesses and their businesses using these technical standards to create a payment manager. Onyx, very much focused on commission payments. Voxel very much focused on reservation and booking. So as you'll see over the course of the rest of this year and next, our effort within HEDNA is designed around fostering adoption from all the different participants in the payment flow. We've talked about the impact of COVID. It's been kind of interesting to have our standards group well underway and then COVID hit and bookings went away. One of the things that we're really seeing that this payment manager construct allows for is a really interesting way to reassess industry payment risks. 6 months ago, everybody was doing well, everyone was financially solvent with a couple of occasional glitches, but now all of the companies in the payment chain are trying to figure out, who's going to survive and what are our risks when it comes to payments. So the payment manager is an important component of expediting and making the payments more efficient, which changes the timing, it eliminates some of the risk. So we've really been focusing on that over the past 6-12 weeks. I think that you'll see more out of this working group on that going forward. As I mentioned, the 2 co-chairs for this group are D. Thomas and Xavi Ginesta. I am the board liaison for this group, so you can reach out to any of the 3 of us if you have any questions or would like to participate. The next of our payment-related working groups is the guest-centric payment group. This group's been around for a couple of years and has been really focusing on some of the structural changes in the industry with regard to payments. And this is whereas the Open Payment Alliance is focused on business-to-business transactions, this is a bit more focused on guest bookings. So really what the guest-centric payments group would like to foster is a better customer payment experience. For those who've been part of this group in the past, that part of the challenge is that payment strategies are really designed by where the hotel property is located, not where the guest is coming from. And so one of the primary focuses of this group is to develop a mechanism for hotel brands to create payment strategies based on where the guest is coming from, not where the individual property is located. Part of that means we need to understand the cost benefit of this approach. It is one of the biggest costs that we can control as an industry. And at this point, 2 years ago, I don't think we really had any sense of the value. Because so many transactions, if not all at the time, were processed at a local property, at a corporate level, we really didn't have any expertise or information rather on how much was being spent on chargebacks, how much was lost to fraud, what the authorization rates on transactions were. So really this group has started to get everyone to look at the data needed to create this strategy and look at the cost benefit. Because of regulations for the past year, much of the group's attention has been working with the various European governments on advocating on behalf of hoteliers with regard to the strong customer authentication protocols in PSD2. Those have been delayed. Looks like they're being delayed a bit again, but we're really trying to make sure that the regulators understand our industry's model. So if you're having challenges with SCA, I certainly would recommend working with the co-chairs of this group as well. The other piece that's kind of interesting for this group is looking at how do we, A, should we, and B, how do we centralize payments at the brand level? And do we look at more with some of the changes relating from COVID especially, do we look more at prepaid bookings and sort of take more of an airline industry model approach to payments for bookings? And you can, I mean, it's a very heated discussion whenever this group discusses this topic. You know, the payment companies are like, this is how the rest of the world works. The hoteliers like, but our guests want this. And so it's a very interesting working group for, you know, a discussion of ideas. Again, as I referenced for COVID impact, you know, we're seeing the hotel brands really focus on conversion rate and cost savings. That's going to be really important as we rebuild our business over the next couple of months, hopefully months. And if you're interested in learning more about the guest-centric payment group, the two co-chairs are Lori Gablehouse with Ingenico and Jason Kennedy, who's also on the HEDNA board with Audrey and myself, and he is also the board liaison for this group. And the last of our payment-related working groups is the third-party compensation group. You may find that to be a new name, and they've rebranded to acknowledge some of the industry changes and have moved away from simply commissions as the industry has moved away from simply commissions. The focus of this group really is to facilitate discussion and education to both sides of the third-party compensation realm, the agencies and the hotels, to identify trends and areas of frictions that need to be solved. So as I mentioned, they have rebranded to acknowledge these industry changes. They're recruiting and securing different purposes. So if you are in the area of commissions or marketing agreements and have either on a hotel side or an agency side, this working group is looking to expand its perspectives. They've been implementing a content calendar, which you will see for the rest of this year. And I think the important thing here is they acknowledge that they want to incorporate viewpoints from non-traditional models. With regard to COVID, unfortunately, the large majority of compensation has virtually disappeared due to the lack of travel, especially corporate travel. There seems to be a slight uptick in some group activity, but it looks like they're attributing these to special rates candidates group, which are more transient medical support and frontline workers. So at this point, the impact of the third-party compensation process isn't really determined. They're expecting that things are going to change pretty dramatically as we move forward. And the working group chairs for this group are Faith Marshall with NTT, Rachel Neal, who many of you have known over the years from HEDNA and some of the HEDNA U sessions that she's led, and Luis Hernandez, who's at IHG. That really is our summary of our working groups and what we're up to now and what we hope to be up to for the rest of the year. like all of you, it's been an amazingly challenging 3 months for each of these groups and for everyone involved. So with that, on behalf of Audrey and myself, just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to our updates, and we're all very happy to provide additional information and support as you need it. Thank you.
Wonderful, great. So as Mike said, and I said in our sessions, we provided you with the working group co-chairs. So if you need to reach out, please feel free to do so. I've already gotten some text messages where some people are interested in joining several of the working groups. So we're thrilled about that. As I mentioned, the working groups are really the heart and soul of HEDNA, and they do a lot of the work for us throughout the year. So next, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our final session for today's HEDNA at Home conference. Matthew Golden, CEO of Trimetric, will be hosting and moderating a panel on data analytics titled Anticipating Market Recovery and Beyond. Matthew, thank you for moderating and pulling this team of data experts together for the membership. We certainly appreciate it. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Audrey, and I'm delighted to be the co-chair of the HEDNA Analytics Work Group and here today to moderate today's panel session. I've got to say, if it had been 20 minutes earlier, you wouldn't have heard a thing because I've just had a thunderstorm go overhead, and I expect that's the danger of working from home and remote conferences. But anyway, hopefully it won't return and you'll be able to hear me for the rest of the session. So today's panel session is titled Anticipating Market Recovery and Beyond. As we're all too aware, the travel industry has been severely impacted by COVID. And today we're going to explore from a data and analytics perspective, where are we now, preparing for recovery, and what's the new normal? But before we proceed, I'd like to say a big thank you to the HEDNA Organizing Committee, Sebastian, Audrey, and the board, and all the others organizing today's event. Never has the importance of online forums and networking opportunities been greater. So thank you very much from all of us. So let me introduce the panelists. We have a great mix of industry leaders on our panel today. They include a leading hospitality business intelligence company, a global hotel chain, and an innovative travel intermediary, which should offer a great mix of opinions and experience. They are Gino Engels, founder and commercial director of OTA Insights. Gino founded the company in 2012, and today it has grown to be a leader in hospitality BI, with a portfolio of award-winning products and 50,000 hotel customers. Richard Biggs, Senior Vice President, Global Revenue Optimization at Radisson Hotel Group. Richard has over 20 years experience working in leadership positions for global hotel chains in distribution and revenue management functions. And finally, Alex Gisbert, founder and CEO FastPay Hotels, a unique B2B travel distributor. FastPay's model is to pay properties within minutes of traveler confirmation of the booking. Prior to FastPay, Alex held senior roles with industry brands that included Thomas Cook and Expedia. So welcome aboard, panel. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to start off talking about where we are now of the three sections. So as I said before, we all know we've been severely impacted by COVID-19. We've heard a lot about specific countries picking up, domestic travel, various information and so forth. But what's the data really telling us? So if you'd all like to answer that, Gino, to start with you, I know you have access to large volumes of data. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, of course. Hi, Matthew, and hi, Richard and Alex, and the rest of the team. We were supposed to be in Amsterdam, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a little bit different now, working from my flight here in London. But we'll try to kind of stay a bit EMEA focused. And of course, there's not really one answer, unfortunately. It's very scattered across the globe and across different countries because there's not really one unified approach to travel and to how to get out of this situation post-COVID. So I think that's probably the best summary I can give. Looking at when travel will recover or how it will recover. we've mainly been looking at how hotels are actually opening up based on the government guidelines. And that has really, basically, that's going to be the start of when people are going to travel again. I think currently, for example, for the UK, it's not very well defined. I think the UK is kind of putting quite stringent measures on people coming to the UK with a kind of 14-day quarantine of anyone coming into the country. So from that perspective, there's also no clear guideline on when hotels will be able to open up. So I think there's a work to do from the UK perspective. So apart from domestic travel, not a lot will happen. Looking at maybe some more forward-thinking regions, like looking at Northern Europe, I think they've been leading the charge a little bit, and I think recovery is starting to go a bit quicker there. I think Sweden didn't even impose lockdown. We're looking at the Scandinavian market and the Netherlands. They have been a bit shorter on the ball, and I think even from early June already started opening up some hotels. But also the Central and Eastern European region, led by kind of Switzerland, Austria, and Germany, where we actually see the majority of the hotels opening up. Domestic travel definitely starting to pick up, and now the borders are opening up as well between these countries, so they're going to start to benefit a little bit from I wouldn't say international, but at least some neighboring visitors coming over. Big question is, how are the holiday destinations going to perform? I think with Spain, Italy, Greece, Portugal, all keen to get going. I think they've started to open up from, I think, mid-June, July onwards. So we'll see how well that's going. A lot of talk is about travel corridors and travel bubbles. Not very clear exactly what it is, but all of these things will need to be kind of very well communicated for people to be able to know whether they can start getting on a flight. I think that's probably the first thing. We see EasyJet started to operate flights this week, and I think that's going to really depend on whether travel will kind of resume, but we kind of see it really in different spots coming, depending on whether guidelines are clear from the government.
Okay,
Richard or Alex, have you seen anything specific from your side?
Yeah, so I'll guess I'll take it next. First of all, thanks for having me, and thanks to the team at HEDNA, Matthew, for organising this event. It's a shame we're not all together in Amsterdam. Personally, I really look forward to seeing the HEDNA community. So as Fastpay Hotels, we're operating in about 78 countries around the world with about 30,000 hotels. So hopefully what we'll be able to share is a bit of a global view. In terms of our data, happy to share, for 3 consecutive weeks, we've seen week-on-week growth of over 25%. So we are definitely seeing acceleration, right? We're definitely seeing more. In fact, last week we were closer to 30% growth. So we're definitely seeing that created bookings, not so much check-ins, but created bookings are growing, which is positive. And then very much with the data lens on, our traffic into our system is growing by more than 25-30%. We've seen 40% growth for the last 2 weeks. So that is to say, the intent to travel is growing. Conversion isn't quite there yet at the same level, but we are definitely seeing more and more demand. When you look at what's being created, and obviously in an awful lot of places, it's hard to check in because countries are closed, particularly in Europe. But when you are seeing, it's very much with the mantra, shorter stays, shorter booking windows, shorter distances. So we're seeing some German domestic, we're seeing some Asian domestic, we're beginning to see some Spanish domestic, Italian domestic, UK domestic, also getting interesting. But by far the most interesting market right now is USA domestic, purely because of the amount of hotels and the amount of destinations that are there. So we are beginning to see that. When you look at also year on year, from our perspective, what we're seeing is that slightly lower ADRs than we'd like to see. And when you look at hotel segments, definitely budget segments seem to be converting much better than luxury as we know. I guess the really positive news for any business is that for 13 consecutive weeks since March, cancellations were outpacing created bookings. And for the last 10 days now on aggregate, we're now beginning to see a reversal of that trend, and we are beginning now to create more bookings than are being cancelled. But hopefully, and that is the trend that we much see everywhere. Hopefully, Matthew, that gives you a bit of an overview of what we're seeing.
Thanks, Alex. And Richard, maybe you could comment, but I'd also be interested in understanding from a data perspective, what are the important metrics that you're using now versus business as usual? You know, how are you following kind of market recovery or beginning to? So what are those key data points?
Hi everyone. Hello, HEDNA. Hello, Matthew. Thank you for organizing this. I think in terms of the key data points, I'm sure being a hotel group and also with OTAs and other parties, the big thing we're looking at is what's the booking pace and what's happening to the booking window. There was a comment made a number of years ago by someone that says the booking window is getting so short, people are going to be booking after they stay. But if we look at it now in terms of what we're seeing on, let's say, market data, we are seeing in China when booking started coming back that the booking window was much shorter. And now we're seeing the same trends happening in the Americas and also happening in Europe. And a lot of that comes down to, I think, from my point of view, still the uncertainty out there as to what's happening with COVID-19, what's happening with the various restrictions, et cetera, that are in place. And kind of going back to the previous question, you know, one of the points that's in there and the challenges is the misinformation or confusion that's out there in terms of where will I be able to fly? How can will I have to go into quarantine? Yes, no. Gino alluded to the flight corridors. So flight corridors were something that popped up first in the UK, so they'd be able to get to Spain, et cetera. But the big question is, what impact does that have on the booking public in terms of creating either false expectations and then disappointment? And, you know, given my own personal example is looking at going to Canada for the summer. My big question is, if I go to Canada, how long am I in quarantine for? And if I come back, how long I will be in quarantine for? And those are a lot of things that people are asking because it's not very easy to know these days. And the other thing that's coming in terms of misinformation, there's been a lot of noise about second wave. If you think about in China, Beijing, they're already mentioning the potential of a second wave. We heard similar news coming out of Italy, and then also with the UK, the big things about the Black Lives Matters and the groups that congregations that that's bringing. What impact will that have? And I think that's adding to the uncertainty we're seeing in people wanting to be able to book.
Okay. Just one further thing on that, Matthew. I think Richard's good point on booking windows. We are seeing insane growth on 2021 bookings. So we are up something like 260% versus this point last year on future bookings for next year. We're taking more bookings for destinations like New York now for Q1 than we are for the next 30 days, which obviously we all understand why. But I think if you're managing inventory or you're listening to the call, we've got a big focus at the moment on making sure people are loading rates and opening rate plans for as long as possible into 2021, because there does seem to be a huge amount of demand, particularly from Latin America into US for Q1 and Q2 of next year.
Okay, thanks, Alex. That's very insightful hearing about way into 2021. Let's move on and talk about preparing for the turn and maybe what are the opportunities, but also challenges and risks as trading picks up. What I'd like to ask Gino and the other two as well is about data-driven strategies. This is data analytics and data. We need to be thinking about preparing for the turn. So what is it that we should be tracking now in terms of capitalizing on the recovery from a data perspective? Gino?
Maybe I'll kick off this. So especially just talking about what we're seeing with some of our clients. And I think I think a lot of it is just, first of all, the basics that they've always been doing. It's kind of making sure setting the right prices. The complication is now the hotels don't always know who they're still competing with because there's not a clear indication of which hotels will open up, which hotels will still be there. So I think it's probably just resetting a little bit who you're competing with and how competitive is the market, because your competition is probably not going to price the way they were pricing a month or two ago, and also not how they were pricing last year. So as kind of Alex was saying, people are booking even long lead times, 6 to 8 months, basically 12 months out. So how are your pricing strategies evolving and who are you competing with? There's a lot of talk then alternative accommodation is feeling a little bit, as for some people, the safer option, whereas other people say chains are probably going to have the upper hand in terms of their their safety and cleanliness guidelines. So I think who are you competing with, who are you pricing with, checking everyone in your region, not just the hotels that you were competing with before is important. And then there's not going to be the same demand anymore that you're going to be competing with. So how can you get ahead of the few bookings that are going to be there? So again, Alex was talking about it before. I'm sure Richard and people at the big chains have been looking at search data for a while, but I think for a lot of the hoteliers these days, that's going to be a bit of a new data point, like looking at flight searches, looking at OTA meta searches. Those are data points that they haven't really historically looked at, but it's going to be super crucial, because if you manage to get ahead of the booking, make sure that who's looking, where are they coming from, so which source market, if it is international or domestic, or which intermediaries are going to be working with are maybe going to bring you slightly different clientele as before, that's going to really give you the upper hand. And probably the last one, like I say, start a bit competition pricing is probably more everybody knows, but you're going to be competing with different people. The search data, I think probably that's going to be a difficult one for the industry to kind of really get to grips with, because that's a bit of a new one. But then the last one is again probably one that's quite familiar, is on parity. So I think just kind of pointed out by the two gentlemen here, the booking lead times are or very short or longer, but very short means that people are booking on the same day or 1 or 2 days out. So let's make sure that you have your best offers on your own website. So make sure that you don't lose sight of parity. Let's not get seduced by some crazy offers from your partners, but make sure that people can book at your website, whether it's desktop or mobile, at the best price. So yeah, I think if you're going to be potentially looking at filling up your hotels for 40-50%, maybe 30-40% of occupancy, let's make sure you don't have to give away another 20% commission on those bookings.
Okay, thanks, Gino. Richard, to ask you, how are you using data better now to prepare for the turn, assuming you are? But also, I wanted to refer to Sebastian's question earlier at the beginning of the conference about the need for real-time data, and I'll add to that forward-looking data, given the situation and the lack of precedence. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think going back to what Gino was saying, parity's become even more important now. We want to make sure we're on everyone's shelves, our own channels and third-party channels. And the best way of doing that and making sure we have placement, et cetera, is through parity. I also agree with Gino is that a lot of the data we're looking at today is very similar to what it was before, but we are starting to dive more into looking at what is happening with flights. And it's not just the number of flights coming into a destination, but it's also what's the capacity on those flights and how much of that capacity is being used. And as we know, also, checking on what's the impact on events. Are events still going on? What's been canceled? What's being rescheduled? Because we're still sort of moving things around to understand, okay, we know what's happening in the next couple of weeks as much as we can based on the data, but how do we see the next 3-6 months go? If you think of the large number of sporting events, congresses, et cetera, that have been rescheduled, is trying to understand the impact that will have on the business. And also still at this stage is understanding how many people will actually be attending these events is a big question. In terms of Simon's question regarding data, a big part of it is trying to understand what's on the books, and not just in terms of revenue and room nights, but segments, the accounts driving that, also the channels. But one of the challenges we face that we alluded to earlier is the fact that since the booking window, Alex had said, I agree with him fully, since the booking window is becoming very short, it's hard to actually see trends at this stage because we just start to see that happening. I think in the next few weeks, over the rest of June and into July, as more markets begin to open and summer travel begins, we'll start to get more data which we can use and be able to understand what are the patterns. For example, if we know a market opens up, so we know, let's say in Europe, the south of France, as well as Spain and Italy will be very popular during the summer months, usually their highest months of the year. How do we see that business picking up? And what feeder markets are going to be driving that? Because that's another thing we're looking at too, is saying a lot of, if we say, for example, the UK is a traditional feeder market for country X. If the UK has 2-week quarantines going when people come back from country X, then we need to understand what other markets are out there feeder markets are out there we can drive business into those destinations from, whether it's domestic, whether it's within the EU or other markets that we can tap into. And I think that's a big part of it, is trying to get more detailed analysis or detailed data on what's coming in the future. In terms of on the books, to Gino's point, searches are very important. We can see if people are searching for a destination, but it's also seeing how many of those people are actually booking, and if we can identify what stimulates the bookings.
Yeah, I think to Gino and Richard's point, it's not so much, Matthew, about new data points. It's about those those of us who are trying to drive bookings to hotels or reservations to hotels, or in fact, just trying to fill a hotel. I think it's about recalibrating what data points that you probably didn't look at with as much focus previously that you should do now. I think, working with some of our strategic partners, the kind of data that they're asking us for and we're sharing with them is not only where the searches are coming from, because nationality searches are obviously going to be key. If we identify, that Germans are willing to cross the border into France for North Order bookings, how do you drive through dynamic rates, specific rate plans for that demand? How do you drive, what booking windows there are, but also one of the things, particularly as leisure opens up in resort destinations, the other thing that we're sharing, and it seems to be very useful for the resort properties, is what the length of stay, the minimum stays of all of those searches are. Traditionally, a lot of resorts will just, because they've always done so, put minimum 5 or minimum 7 minimum stay restrictions on some of those hotels. The reality is that people possibly maybe only have a budget for 4 nights this year or for 6 nights this year. We're sharing that data with some of our resort and leisure properties. And what we're seeing is that they're beginning to create more rate plans, more accustomed to shorter stays. The cheapest 7-night holiday is a 6-night holiday in many cases, right? So I think definitely revenue managers should be pushing intermediaries like FastPay Hotels for that data. And when we send it to hotels, they seem to capitalize on it a huge amount. I think flight data is critical. And then just one final data point, which is probably not an obvious one, Matthew, to the revenue management team or to the sales team, but more relevant to the finance team is just watch out who's not paying you, right? A lot of static contracts, MICE contracts, groups, stuff that doesn't come through the scalable, dynamic, virtual credit card route. Just revenue managers should be aware of who they're running promotions with or who they're running tacticals with. Just make sure you go back to finance, make sure that that business is going to be there, going to pay you, is secure, is insured, whatever policy you have at place. And traditionally revenue managers, that hasn't really been their problem, right? Yeah. But as you prepare for the turn, particularly in Europe or particularly in somewhere like the UK, many travel businesses, frankly, anesthetized right now through furloughs or soft bank loans or et cetera, et cetera. But as the turn comes and some of the state and governmental help, pulls away and people are exposed to the cold hard face of a smaller market, a less profitable market, some businesses will struggle with that. So I just think it's also important that sales and revenue managers guys are still going back to finance guys and saying, am I good to keep on going with these guys? Are we being paid on time? Are we being paid properly? And unfortunately, that is also part of the new normal, right? Is just making sure that you're dealing with creditworthy people. I think that's unfortunately a new data point for many people.
Credit data and choice of partners. Let's move on then to the new normal. So just to ask you a very broad question, what does the future of the hospitality market look like? What's going to be critical, Richard, going forwards?
I think critical is going to be, well, a lot of things are going to be critical. I think for me right now, the biggest critical thing to understand is what's opening in terms of the markets and what's going to be the drivers within those markets. So to give you an example of London hotels are theoretically supposed to open early July, but if nothing else is open in London in terms of restaurants and bars and attractions, it's going to be very hard to simulate demand for London because no one's going to go to sit in a hotel room with no bars, restaurants, or attractions to go and see. And I think for me, that's one of the big things to understand is as we see markets start to come back, it's actually seeing what are the levers that get the markets coming back. So for example, we mentioned earlier is that the Nordics, said the Nordics are looking pretty good. Yes, so what's driving business in the Nordics? Part of it comes in, they've eased their restrictions earlier. They haven't been so severely impacted. And it's being able to take that and sort of extrapolate that on different markets. And the challenge we face, because there has been so many different levels of impact and restrictions put in place, is how does that, how do we actually build our forecasting, et cetera, strategies based on that? If you go back a couple, let's say a month and a half, 2 months ago, when Spain and Italy were at that time, the hardest hit by COVID, you wouldn't be thinking now that people would already be booking for June and July into those markets, but people are, because it's where the sun is. So we need to see, how does that sort of transition happen within the other markets? And a big part of it comes down is, I still very much, and Alex mentioned it again, is what do we see in terms of transport data, flights, trains, et cetera, so people can actually get to locations. I think we can't underestimate the importance of the transport in how we're going to see the recovery coming.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Gino, would you like to add to the future of the hospitality market? You're on
mute, I think.
One area in particular I've been thinking about is traveler experience. I mean, travelers are going to be very concerned, interested in where they're going and the reputation of their hotels and so on. So how does that change the landscape? Is there other data that becomes more relevant and so forth?
I think one thing, hi Richard again, I think one thing will be interesting, you know, we have all the third-party review scores where we go in terms of the quality of the hotel, etc. I'm quite sure, you know, if you look at all the major brand websites, etc., they're all spending a lot, and correctly so, going and talking about what they're doing in terms of deep cleaning, etc., to make their hotels as safe as possible. And I think safety used to be before about, you know, let's say maybe not getting robbed or theft or something like that along that lines. But I think safety now also means a lot more about health protection that's put in place regarding cleaning, measures that are being taken by the hotels. They're not the physical building, but also with their staff. You know, if you go and you think about it, it's the whole thing about having the plexiglass dividers at the front desk, spacing in restaurants, etc., face masks. All of that's going to become a big play into how people view a hotel or a restaurant, bar, or any attraction.
Thanks, Richard. Alex, we talked about parity and the importance of parity going forward. And what does this mean about hotelier and OTA relationships in the future? What do you think is going to happen there?
So I think it's more important than ever, to be fair. I think, if you take it up a level, I think the new normal is a smaller market with a less affluent consumer base. And I think for many of us, unfortunately, some hotels will be competing massively on ADR. So I think everything all of us have to get used to a less profitable transaction, whichever part of the market you're in. You know, if you're Trimetrics and you're taking a percentage, or if you're a payment gateway and you're working, you know, with Voxel or with Mike, and you have to take a smaller percentage. If you're a intermediary, you've got to learn with less, because hotels will have to price accordingly, and therefore our expectations is that hotels, quite reasonably, frankly, will begin to bring commissions down. Now, anything that erodes their ability to achieve the highest possible ADR is going to be a problem, and obviously maintaining parity is going to be critical. As an intermediary, from our perspective, nothing frustrates us more. You know, we're 100% dynamic rates. Nothing frustrates us more than making the effort on integration to then find out that hotels don't control their distribution and are breaking parity through static rates or some local receptive or DMC or whatever, very frustratingly, or they've given some crazy rate plan or override to an OTA or a B2B, or frankly, most of the time they're the same thing. So I think it's really, really important that no one, certainly we don't believe anyone should now, particularly hotels obviously, should be thinking things are tough, I abandon the parity strategy. We're very much invested from our side on that, but nothing would frustrate us more. We would struggle to support hotel chains, I think, that we're not enforcing parity, because once you're in the parity game, when someone breaks the chain, obviously that's incredibly frustrating. And I think on the new normal, Matthew, I think this lack of everybody has to go back to the value chain and say, I know that I'm not going to extract the same margin or the same profit from the transaction. It doesn't matter what you do in the value chain. I think it's absolutely critical that everyone goes back and says, how do I automate more? How do I make this more internet, more digital, more dynamic? Whatever version of that is that applies to you, more scalable, less human contact, because it's going to be, everybody's going to have to get used to earning a little bit less from every one of those transactions. If you're able to charge $100 for that hotel room night 6 months ago, you're probably going to be charging 75, 80. Everyone's cost base has got to come a little bit. Everyone's expectations are going to come down a little bit. So I think the new normal is about a lot of the things that we've talked about on the data. I think it's definitely reinforcing parity, but I think what's really important is that the way that you handle, you manage your costs inside your organization to adapt to the new normal of the profitability of every transaction is totally critical. And unfortunately, that does mean we're going to get a lot of nasty news from travel organizations about cost cutting, et cetera, but I think what we're certainly working on adapting to is how do we account manage, how do we work, how do we pay, how do we receive from our perspective to make sure that our cost per transaction comes down. And I think that's going to come across, that's got to go across everything. And I think that means something different to everybody, but for everyone, the new normal is get used to this being a slightly less profitable business. And anything that's driving cost, trips, static rates, disparity, expensive forms of payment or payment collection are going to have to be phased out, because it's going to be very difficult to maintain. Owners who own a lot of franchise properties are going to require profitability to be maintained or grow, and I think that's going to be a really difficult part of certainly the next 6 months to 12 months for all of us.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Just to tie up then, so and this is a final question before we move on to some QA. So in the new normal, what's going to be the relevance of data and analytics? And just tie into that, any specific message you'd like to leave the conference with to finish off? Richard?
I think data and analytics continues to grow in importance. I think it's important now, but it's going to become even more important, because now we need to be able to go and look at what changes are happening within the short term. And then once we sort of see whether it's pickup, issues regarding parity, how can we more quickly react to those and address those and then build on those? And I think Alex's point, parity is way more important today than it was before, because you want to make sure on the shelf is if we see parity issues, we react to those very quickly. And as we start to see demand and bookings come into markets, is making sure we're reacting on that and using that to sort of model other locations that haven't started picking up to see what we need, what would be the stimulants, or how do we see those markets starting to pick up. I think the challenge we have right now is we've never faced anything like COVID-19, is trying to understand how the business comes back and how we as the industry can be ready for it.
Thanks, Richard. Gino, a few final thoughts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that it is going to be challenging. I think what we touched on before, especially for at the moment, a lot of people are going to have to do a lot more with a lot less resource. I think the question as well from a lot of people that have been furloughed or that are currently not at the head office or the regional office or at the hotels, how many of them will be able to come back? And with people who are left, how are they going to deal with this complexity? Because dealing with searches, flight data, transport data, open guidelines, having an understanding of alternative accommodation, short-term lead times, long lead times. So what are my source markets? So it is going to get more complex, and I think we need to make sure that myself as a technology vendor and kind of also Alex as an intermediary, that we kind of make sure that we have tools in place to help with that and to try to make it as easy as possible to understand, because I think it is going to get more complex and commercial teams are going to have to work together. I think revenue and distribution, we're already kind of converging more and more. I think that's really going to be supercharged now, and marketing is going to be kind of have to be on the same line, because there's only so much budget to spend. There's only so much demand to be captured. So how can we make sure that we're all on the same line and we're going to have to do more with less. So bit a risk of self-promoting here, but I think, yeah, the technology vendors are going to have to be able to come up with some solutions to be able to get that into the hands of hoteliers and learn how to work with these new data points and this complexity.
Thanks, Gino. Alex, just to finish off, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think anyone who is expecting, this is the turn and the and the curve that hopefully now goes up for all of us. It's not plug and play. You don't unplug January and February distribution channels, cost base, commissions, payment terms, rate plans, and plug them in June 2020, and everything goes back to normal. I would advise on anyone, certainly our perspective is assume nothing. And go and get data points for everything that you do and revalidate everything you know. And anyone that's a touch point, if you're working with an intermediary like Fastboy Hotels, if you're working with hotel chains, if you're working with a technology vendor, everyone's pretty much, particularly in this community, in this HEDNA community, we've all invested massively over the last 2-3 years on getting a lot more data. Go and get that OTA to segment, what's third-party distribution, what's OTA distribution, what's B2C distribution, what's package distribution, what nationality distribution, what's the booking window, what's the minimum stay. That data sits in all of our businesses. And I mean, this is a data panel. If someone's not giving you that data, it's because they're holding it back. It's not because they don't want to give it to you. And it's because they don't want to give it to you. But I would suggest we're not all going to help each other out and come out of the turn until we're pushing for that data very hard and we're sharing together. And I think that's going to be key for intelligent and efficient decisions. And God knows that efficiency is going to be critical because, as Gino rightly says, we're all going to have to do the same or more with a lot less resources.
Thanks very much, guys. Just a couple of questions. In fact, on returning to normal, one of them is about the cost of acquisition. So how will the cost of acquisition change in the new normal, and have channels and distribution in brackets? Anyone like to field that one, Richard?
Yeah, I think cost of acquisition is going to remain key. And I think because as we're all working on reduced revenues, which means reduced available spend, a lot of it's going to come down as diving into it even into more detail and at a more finite level. And then tying that into return on investment, because if let's say I have $100 or 100 euros, I need to make sure I'm going to spend that 100 euros on something that's going to have a definite ROI that I can measure, and that if it's not working, I can quickly change. So cost of acquisition, yes, what it costs us to get the business, still critical, but we're going to have to become way more flexible in how we want to handle it, in being able to turn things off and on, and only focusing on what's really giving us a significant ROI. I think the days of fluff activities have been long gone, but I think the final nail in the coffin has happened for those.
Thanks, Richard.
And I think also as distribution channels in the post-COVID world start merging, a lot of hotels, particularly in Europe, will have tour operator rates, OTA rate plans, wholesaler rate plans, intermediary rate plans, whatever you have, those are all going to have to mesh into one now. I think those kind of level of differentiation probably doesn't make sense, particularly because nowadays you have individual OTAs that are now B2B and wholesalers, and they're tour operators, and they've got German tour operators attached to them, et cetera, et cetera. We expect the take, call it discount from bar or commission, will come down. We think that's probably the right thing for the industry. And as long as all of the players and all of the distribution channels come down in the same proportion, that makes sense. But I think that stringent differentiation by channel, I think will start coming to an end, frankly, because it doesn't make sense that tour operators have this massive advantage, yet we're going to see that they're going to be the ones to come back the slowest into a post-COVID world.
I agree.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Richard. And thank you, Gino, for being on the panel, making yourself available, and for your insights today. Really appreciated. Thank you once more.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Wow. Thank you, Matthew. And thanks to our panelists. Thank you for providing such interesting viewpoint on data analytics. I'm sure all of the attendees found this information invaluable. as we anticipate market recovery. So our time is up and our sessions have concluded for today. I just wanted to say that the HEDNA Board of Directors and the HEDNA at Home Conference co-chairs, Mike Carlo, and I would like to thank everyone for joining today's sessions. And a big thank you to our conference keynote, Katie Morrow, and our conference moderators, Henry and Matthew, and as well to all of our panelists. Your continued support and involvement are truly appreciated by the entire association and our membership. And thank you finally to the EWAL team that helped organize and run the technical production of HEDNA at Home. And I just want to sincerely thank everybody, and I look forward to seeing everyone traveling soon. Take care, everyone, and we will talk soon.